Yeah, okay. Wear my name tag. Very official. I like being. You know, that actually probably is part of why. That should work. I'm just advancing slides with the computer, right? Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Emily. I work with Lori here at Grey Egg Services. We are excited to have our horse nutrition night tonight. It's our 19th course out of 20 this winter period, so we're almost there. Thank you so much to Jessica McCoag for coming and speaking to us tonight and this presentation together and sharing all of your knowledge with us. Yeah, of course, I think. For anybody, I guess Jessica said that she would take questions anytime throughout the presentation, so chime in. It should be a little bit informal and get some discussion going. If anybody has questions, that's great. As I said before, we are recording the course. We'll send out the recording to all of you guys tomorrow likely, so that you can review it if you want to. And I will edit out chatting from the beginning and the end. And then on the table in front of you, so Jessica's got some information. The evaluation is the other sheet of paper. We really, 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 really hope that you will fill it out for us because it helps us. The most important thing on there is the suggestions for next year in our eyes, because we want to know what topics we should book speakers for, so we know what you guys want to hear, so we can run another winter course program. I think that's all that I had to say. So, all right, thank you.
All right, hi everybody. I am Jessica. As Emily said, I want to keep this nice and informal. If you guys have questions or you don't understand anything or you want clarification on anything, anytime, please just ask. We have a nice intimate group here, so we might as well, get the questions you have answered, even if it's not necessarily exactly what we're talking about. That's okay. Just let me know, and I'm happy to adjust what we're talking about. I can cover other stuff if there's other questions you have. We do have 2 full hours, and I won't probably take that with the presentation, so we will have some time at the end too for more specific questions. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jessica McCoag. I have a master's degree in animal nutrition, specializing in equine from the University of Guelph, and I've been working with Purina as an equine nutrition consultant for 6 years now. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about feeding the performance horse. And some of the objectives we're going to go through tonight, building a diet. So starting with our forage, adding energy, protein, we're going to divert a little to talk a bit about top line evaluation score versus body condition score. Those are 2 very distinct differences, and we should know how to do both of those in order to help our horses have a good balanced diet, make sure they're getting all the things that they need from their feed. And we'll talk about vitamins and minerals in the diet. We're going to talk about water, because hydration is the most important thing you can do for your horse. We're going to talk about how to select a feed for a performance horse. We'll talk a little bit about electrolytes, and then I'm also going to add in, this was kind of a last minute, I decided I wanted to cover because I get so many questions about it, is preventing gastric ulcers in performance horses. It's been a huge topic of conversation for quite a while, but it's really gained momentum lately, so I thought it was a good idea to kind of slide that in while we are talking about performance horse nutrition as another kind of side topic. But again, if there's anything else you guys have questions about, please don't be shy. So when we have a performance horse, what are our goals for this horse as far as nutrition goes? We want to meet or exceed their genetic potential. So every horse is going to have, a set what they can do. Some are more athletic than others. Some are predetermined and predisposed to certain types of disciplines, but we want this horse to meet or exceed the genetic potential that they have. So we want to be able to feed them in order for them to do that. We want to make sure they have enough stamina or energy for their event, but not be too hot, right? We don't want uncontrollable horses that we can't ride. So we need to balance the energy they need to perform well with the energy we can handle as a rider and as a horse handler to make sure that the horse is controllable and not dangerous or unfun for us to ride, right? If they're too full of energy and we're fighting with them the whole time. We want optimum body condition on a horse. So we don't want them too thin or underdeveloped in their top line. They're going to not have enough stamina to perform in whatever discipline it is that we need them to perform in. But we don't want them too heavy or overweight, because this is going to cause a lot of issues with their joints and extra stress on their limbs, and just in general can cause a lot of health issues if a horse is kept too overweight. So it's a fine line where we want to keep them as far as their body condition and their top line. We want them to stay sound, and that's a really big one. The more stress we put on our horse and the more we exercise them, the more soundness issues tend to come up. So anything we can do nutritionally to try to help that horse and keep them sound and prevent issues is always a good thing. And we want to be competitive. Most people who are performing with their horse, some people are just doing it for fun, but you want to do well, right? You want your horse to do the best that you and them can as a team. So if we're talking about a performance horse, then generally we're trying to keep them competitive in whatever sport it is that they are competing in. So this is a chart of digestible energy requirements for horses, and it is based on an 1,100-pound horse. This comes from the NRC, or the nutrient requirements for horses from the National Research Council. And basically what I want to point out in this chart is the difference between a horse, so an adult horse in no work, the top line here, and a horse in heavy exercise, and how much more energy they need. So this first column, it says megacals a DE, that's digestible energy. It's basically a measure of the calories that the horse needs. And a horse that's not in work, same sized horse, is only requiring 16 megacals a day to maintain their body condition. A horse in heavy exercise needs 26. That's a huge jump in energy. So when we start asking a lot out of our horses and exercising them heavily, their calorie needs are going to drastically increase from a horse that's at maintenance. There's also a pretty good jump in the crude protein required. So that's, again, protein requirements. The more the horse works, the more the muscle needs to replenish itself and to maintain good, healthy muscles, top line, and rebuild any muscles that might be damaged when the horse is working. So when we talk about the exercise levels, I know, I kind of pointed out the heavy exercise and the maintenance, but understanding how much work your horse is actually doing is important. Sometimes people think their horse is really in hard work, and it's not really that hard work. So when we look at calorie requirements and nutrient requirements for a horse, when we're talking about the average kind of active show horse, so we're talking ridden 3 to 5 hours a week, 30% walk, 55% trot, some canter, and some jumping or other skill, cutting, whatever that horse might do. Those digestible energy requirements are around 23 megacals per day for the 500 kilo horse. So I would say most higher level show horses are probably in this category. Most leisure horses are kind of trail riding horses. Maybe you only ride a couple of times a week and it's mostly walk. That would be considered light exercise to sometimes maintenance, depending on how often you ride. And I would only consider an extreme exercise or a heavy exercise horse to be an endurance horse, a race horse, maybe a high level eventer, something like that, where they're working 5-6 days a week, very heavy, lots of gallop and canter work and jumping. So I think sometimes people get a little confused as to what is light exercise, what is moderate exercise, and trying to be a little bit realistic about that. To know where you should be balancing your horse to, so you're not overfeeding them thinking they're doing more work than they're actually doing. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. And it is worth pointing out, every horse is an individual. So just because this chart says that your horse in moderate work, that's 500 kilos, needs 23 megacalories. Some of them need a lot more than that to maintain weight. Some of them need a lot less, but it's kind of a starting value that we can work from based on the research for the average horse, and then we obviously adjust based on individual metabolism of the horse. So the most important thing after water's number one, but if we're talking about feed, I would say forage is going to be the number one thing you need to look at for your horse. And the reason for that is that most horses are getting 80-90% of their calories from hay. So that is the biggest determinant of where your nutrition is starting from. So I always want to look at people's hay when we're trying to build a diet. Horses are monogastric hindgut fermenters. So this means that unlike a cow or a ruminant, they don't do the fermenting of the fiber like hay in their stomach. It happens in the hindgut, so after their stomach, in their colon. And that makes them a little bit different than a lot of other herbivores that would do a lot of their fermentation and breakdown of the fibers in their stomach before it gets to the intestine. The horses do have a pretty significant microbial population in their hindgut. So these are the microbes, the good bacteria that live in the hindgut of the horse and help them break down this fiber. And they're very important. If the hindgut of the horse and the microbial population is not healthy, horses will run into a lot of trouble digesting and absorbing nutrients. So it's really important that we keep those microbes happy. The average horse should be getting a minimum of 1.5 to 2% of their body weight in hay a day. Performance horses are most likely going to be getting 2 or more % of their body weight a day. Some really easy keeping horses, we might get them as low as 1%, but that would be a bare minimum. It's really not healthy for them to have less than that. So if we're looking at a 1,000-pound horse, we're probably feeding them somewhere between 15 and 20 pounds of hay a day as a kind of minimum, right? The most cost-effective way to meet your performance horse or any horse's caloric requirement is with good quality forage. So it's a good idea to test your hay and know what you're working with if that's possible. It's not always possible. Sometimes, you might board your horse somewhere and they switch hay suppliers all the time. So getting an idea of what you're really feeding is hard. But if you get enough hay, you know, for 4 to 6 months at a time from the similar suppliers, similar type of hay, it is really worth testing your hay. It's not expensive to do. And you get a really good idea of what you're working with so that you can make adjustments to your diet based on your hay. And I really feel that not many horse people do that. Dairy people, cattle farmers, they do that all the time. Hay tester all the time. They do it like once a week, right? It's like all the time. And horse people don't do that. So not that it's as important sometimes, you know, horses are not production animals. So there's a kind of a difference there in the standard of nutrition that we need to keep the horse healthy. But I do think that that's something horse owners overlook, and hay is super important. So if we can test it to what we're working with, then it really makes nutrition a lot easier. So hay maturity and harvest date and weight can vary dramatically, the nutrition that you're getting from your hay. So the most important factor affecting quality of hay would be when your hay was cut. The later the hay is cut in the year, the more mature the grasses are. Typically, the lower the protein, higher the lignin or the undigestible fiber portion, and the lower the calories in the hay. You know, if you're looking at a first or a second or a third cut of the same field, your nutrition can be vastly different. It's really important to think about that. And sometimes we have no control over it, right? We're at the mercy of the weather when hay is cut. Sometimes it rains when we want to get our hay off and it's late, and you know, everybody struggles with that. But just be aware of how much that can really affect, you know, a week or two difference in when you've cut that hay can make a really big difference in the digestibility, the fiber levels, soluble and insoluble fiber levels, as well as the protein. There is a continuous change in quality as the plant matures. So your cell wall content increases. Indigestible lignin, as I said, builds up in the cell wall as the plant matures. So this is the portion of fiber that the horse can't use as calories. It's just going to pass through into the manure. A little bit of lignin is not a bad thing. You're always going to need some insoluble fiber in the diet, but the more you have, the harder it is for that horse to maintain their body weight on that hay, and the more you're going to have to feed to keep them in good condition. There is a really rapid change in digestibility of hay as it matures. So there's been studies that show that there's significant declines in digestibility in 2 to 3 days when you're looking at hay and as it grows, right? Like 2 days later, you have a whole different nutritional profile in that same hay. And when you do an analysis on your hay, you're going to get protein, fat, ADF, and NDF, which are measures of fiber digestibility, and the digestible energies. We talked about the calories in the horse. You're going to know how many calories per pound or per kilogram is in that hay, which will help you determine how much the horse needs to eat to maintain the body condition. So for this is a really nice example. So an 1,100 pound horse in light work needs about 20 megacalories per day. And the first hay, this one on the, I guess, my left, your right, is a late cut grass mixed hay. So if you're feeding 18 pounds of this hay and it's 0.7 megacalories per pound, you're getting 12.6 megacalories out of that hay. So in order to reach that 20 megacalories that the horse needs, you need to add 7.4 from additional feed, right? But if you switch to another hay that's higher in calories, more digestible, so hay B, which is 0.95 megacalories per pound, we're now getting 17 megacalories out of our hay, and you only have to feed 2.9 megacalories from your feed. So you can see that switching from a lower digestible, lower calorie hay to a little bit nicer hay, you can get a really significant increase in calories that your horse is taking every single day, which can mean you can feed less concentrated feed and sometimes save money, because a bale of hay is still a lot cheaper than a bag of so far anyways. So yeah, a simple change in your hay quality from A to B can result in a change of 1 body score point in as little as 6 days. It's a huge difference.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like we always try to feed as much hay as we can.
Yeah.
Just so that it stops always
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Give all the hay. Right. So is there a balance between that and even that? Like, you know, if I have something that maybe isn't as dense in calorie, but they can
Eat more of it. Yeah.
all the time.
It depends on the type of horse. So this presentation, when I put it together, was kind of specifically aimed for performance horses. who are working hard and probably need help to maintain their body weight. Easier keeping horses that are maybe not working so hard, you don't want necessarily the really good quality hay because you're going to get too fat, right? So there is a balance between keeping forage in front of them all the time, because that is absolutely the healthiest thing for your horse. Excuse me. And making sure that they're getting enough digestible powder. So sometimes you do want a little bit lower, not lower quality hay, but lower digestibility hay, lower calorie hay for those easier keeping horses. But you also have to balance that with, can their hind gut digest it? Are they getting a big hay belly? Are they losing their top line? You know, there has to be a balance. So they do need some good soluble, good quality fiber in their diet. Sometimes that doesn't always come from their hay, right? You can add a really good quality fat and fiber feed, or you can, you know, include roughage chunks or something like that that's going to bring some soluble fiber to the diet and still keep that lower calorie hay in front of them all the time to keep them busy, right? It just depends on what type of horse we're talking about. But in this example, we're talking about, you know, a performance horse who's struggling to maintain their weight, and this is an easy change rather than just upping the amount of grain we give them. Try to look for a little bit better quality hay and get the calories that way. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so once we've got our forage in our diet, we need to balance for what's missing in the forage. So sometimes the forage is not going to provide enough calories or digestible energy. It's often not going to provide enough amino acids or protein, especially for a performance horse. And it almost always is not going to provide all the vitamins and minerals that a horse needs. So when we're talking about energy, if we need to add energy to this horse's diet because he's not maintaining weight on just hay alone, he needs some help. There's a few ways to do it. So the first way is adding diets that are high in non-structural carbohydrates, so NSC. Most horse people have heard that term before. It's a measure of the starch and sugar in a feed or in a hay or whatever you're feeding horse, grass, anything they feed. And the good thing about higher NSC products is those non-structural carbohydrates provide a good burst of short-term energy. So for high intensity, short duration work, racehorses need some starch and sugar in their diet. They cannot get enough energy to perform the job they need to do on just, you know, fat and forage alone. Horses who are doing barrel racing, some jumping, other sports that require a lot of sprinting, kind of short bursts of expenditure of energy, but not necessarily long duration, normally benefit from having not, you know, entirely high NSC diets, but a moderate to high NSC diet in most cases. We'll talk about some cases where that doesn't make sense, but in general, that's kind of what the benefit of using some higher NSC products are, is for those types of horses. The other way you can add calories to your horse is structural carbohydrates. So this is the less digestible forms of fiber. You can still add some calories that way through fiber. So unfortunately, though, you have to watch that it's not as digestible. The horse can't get as much from it. So when you start getting your less digestible hays, the ADF and NDF, which is the structural carbohydrates, start going up. And when they hit a certain level, the horse is really not going to be able to utilize those calories very well. It's not super digestible. And the third way that you can add calories is oils or fat. So fats are great for long-term energy. So low to moderate intensity work, longer duration work. Horses can draw on that calorie level for a longer period of time, but it's not as quick. So it doesn't work as well for horses who need quick bursts of speed, like race horses. But it does work well for horses that are maybe doing endurance work, intense trail riding or competitive trail riding. Even most lower level performance horses where they're not necessarily sprinting in their job, do well getting most of their calories, really additional calories from fat. They don't need a whole lot of starch and sugar. That makes sense to everybody? Any questions? Okay. So why do we need starch and sugar at all? I've kind of covered this a little bit, but starch and sugar are necessary for replacing glycogen stored in the muscle. So it's essential for any racing, sprinting, jumping, that kind of thing. They do need that energy. They can't get it all from fat. The main source of energy for muscles during exercise is oxygen, or sorry, it is the main source of energy when there's not oxygen available. So when the muscles are depleted of oxygen, they rely on that glycogen store that comes from the starches and sugars for energy. So if they don't have this, the horse is going to fatigue really easily, and they're not going to be able to do their job. So this type of exercise is called anaerobic exercise. That's the short, intense burst of exercise, sprinting and jumping, that kind of thing. So if they don't have enough glycogen in the muscle, again, they're going to become fatigued and they're not going to be able to do their job. So why do we need to control starch and sugar though? There are situations where some horses cannot tolerate high levels of starch and sugar. If they have metabolic disorders, Cushing's, laminitis horses, all kinds of different, there's tons of out there, insulin resistance and all of those types of horses, they really cannot tolerate high levels of NSC. So in those horses, we have to be really careful and keep those NSC levels low. And we do know that if you feed too much starch, even to a healthy horse who really needs those starches and sugars for energy, like a racehorse, if you feed them too much at once, it will overload the stomach and will spill into the hindgut. And then we have issues with hindgut, colics, all kinds of stuff that is not so fun. And the reason for this is that a horse's stomach is pretty small in comparison to the size of the animal, and they really can't handle large volumes of feed at once. So those horses that do need higher energy levels from starches and sugars, we need to feed them in smaller volumes. We don't want to be giving them, more than 5 pounds of grain at a time, right? Big meals. It's going to overload that stomach. It's going to end up in the hindgut. Then you're going to have a lot of problems. You're going to kill off the microbes. You're going to have acidosis, all kinds of issues. So for horses who don't necessarily need starch and sugar energy, maybe they're not race horses, they're not jumping a lot, they're doing more lower intensity exercise, fat can be a really great source of calories for them. So fats actually have 2.2 times more energy than carbs in a gram per gram basis. So we're looking 9 kilocalories per gram for fat versus 4 kilocalories per gram for a carb. So you can get more energy, more calories per pound of a fat versus a starch. This is a great energy source for horses who need stamina or long distance energy, long-term energy. We do see better recovery time in horses as well after exercise when they have a significant level of fat in their diet. And if you're going to try a higher fat diet in your horse or switch over from a more starchy energy source to fat, it normally takes about 3 weeks before you're going to see the results of that. So I always warn people that, okay, they've switched off of a grain diet and they're putting their horse on this high fat diet and they fed it for a week and it didn't do anything. Okay, you didn't give it enough time, right? You need to give it a fair chance, 3-4 weeks even, before you're going to see a difference in that horse's energy depletion. So how many here feed their horses some sort of oil or fat on top of their diet? Yeah, a lot of people do. What kind do you use?
Canola oil?
Yeah. Yeah, canola. Anybody else? Flax oil. Good, you guys are on track. So, fats all have the same calories pound per pound. Whether you feed corn oil, canola oil, or rice bran, or flax oil, they're all the same calories. But the quality of the oils do really differ. And most of that comes from the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fats in that oil. So we want to find something that has a ratio less than 10-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3. Closer to 5-to-1 is more ideal. 5-to-1 is about what pasture is, and we hypothesize in equine nutrition that is a pretty good feed stuff for our horse, and we're trying to always mimic what fresh pasture would bring to the horse's diet. And most horses' diets are going to be inverse to that, so they're going to be much higher in omega-6 than omega-3. We also know that omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, and omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. So we're always trying to increase that omega-3 level so that it's a little bit closer to that 5-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 in the overall diet, right? So rice bran is a really popular oil, and it has been for a long, long, long time. And again, it will put weight on the horse. It's the same calories as any other oil, but the omega-6 to 3 ratio on rice bran is 19-to-1. So it's really, really high in omega-6s. So if you're going to add fat, that's not my first choice. Again, I feel like if you're adding fat to your diet for the sake of adding calories, okay, use whatever fat you want, use the cheapest one, it doesn't really matter. But if you're trying to also bring anti-inflammatory properties, make the diet a little more balanced as far as omega-6 and 3s, you might as well try an oil that's higher in omega-3. So if you're looking, soybean oil is actually much better. It's 7-to-1, so it's a much more favorable source of omega-3s. And if you're looking at the kind of common one, flaxseed would be the best source of omega-3s, not the best fat. There's always a best one. Anyways, I don't want somebody to go out here and say, only feed flax oil, that's the best oil. But it is the best source of omega-3s that we commonly feed. Next would be canola, and then soybean, then sunflower, corn, and rice bran. Or poor choices if we're trying to find omega-3 high fats. Does that make sense to you? All right. Very quiet group. Okay, so moving on from fats, we've now talked about all the different ways that we can add calories to this horse's diet to make up for what he may not be getting enough of in his hay. The next thing he's likely not getting enough of in his hay, especially if he's a performance horse, is protein. So a protein deficient diet, or if you have lots of protein, but the amino acids, which make up the protein, are not balanced, then you're going to have a horse with poor top line, poor muscling. You also see a decrease in bone density and tendon strength. So these are not properties that we want to see in a performance horse when we're trying to ask him to perform athletically. Those are not good qualities to have in your performance horse. Does everybody know or heard about what an amino acid is and how that relates to protein? A little bit. Okay. So amino acids are the building blocks that make up protein. And you can have a diet that's very high in protein, but if it doesn't have the correct amino acids that the horse needs, it will not do its job. It will not be able to keep their top line. It will not be able to help them build strong muscles and strong hooves and good hair coat and all those things that we need protein to do. So when we're looking at amino acids, the first 3 we want to look at are lysine, methionine, and threonine. And they are known to be required in the diet of horses. And they are the first 3 limiting amino acids. So what that means is that if those 3 are not available in the diet, they're not balanced in the diet, it doesn't really matter what other amino acids you add or have in the diet, the horse will not be able to use them. So it's first thing we want to do when we're balancing amino acids is look at lysine, then methionine, and then threonine. And if you get those 3 balanced, then the rest of them normally fall into play pretty easily. So here's a question for the group. Can you improve top line in a horse with just exercise?
Right.
So that's not just exercise, right? If we're not changing anything else, we're just going to start exercising that horse more. Will he build more confidence? Probably not. Okay, good. So when we're talking about top line, I guess we'll talk about that a little more. Exercise helps. The horse needs to be exercised and exercised properly to build muscle. But if the horse's diet is lacking in those amino acids that will build muscle, it doesn't matter how much you exercise him, he's actually going to lose top line because you're going to be using up that protein and those amino acids that he needs to build his muscle in exercise, and he's actually going to lose muscle tone. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm not saying the horse won't get fitter. He will. He will gain muscle in other parts of his body, but that withers back croup top line area that we saw on the previous slide and is on your little pages there if you want to look. That area specifically is really a telltale sign that your horse is not getting enough protein. If you have poor top line, normally it is really easy for me to go into the barn and say, okay, let's test your hay, because everybody in here has a bad top line. It's probably because you don't have enough protein. It really goes hand in hand. So you can improve top line with exercise, but you do need to have a good diet, and you do need to provide those amino acids that the horse needs to build muscle.
Can you go back, you don't have to go back slides, you probably just have it on your head, but when you were talking about moderate exercise, a horse has moderate exercise and eating 23 grams.
Yeah.
How much protein did you say?
We can go back and
Higher
look.
than
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
18 or something.
Yeah, let's see.
Right.
Da-da-da.
And I think I come from
I
a
have to go
school
here on
a
this.
long time ago that thought the more protein they feed your horse, the hotter they get.
Yeah, that is a very common myth, and it's really not true. Horses, even if they have too much protein in their diet, they don't get hot. They will if they have too many starches and sugars. That will make a horse hot. But too much protein, a horse will just start to pee it out and have steam. That's what will happen. But they won't get hot. And honestly, it's pretty hard to overfeed a hard-working horse protein, because they do have a pretty high requirement, right? Like 862 grams a day. That's a lot of protein. You're not getting that necessarily from, the average 8 or 9% protein grass hay that people tend to feed their horses, right? Well,
But if you're doing that 8 or 9% of
Yeah.
your hay.
Yeah.
And you're feeding a concentrate
Yeah.
with 8 or 9%.
but you have to look at how much you're feeding, right? So if you're feeding an 8-9% hay and your horse is eating 15 pounds, right? And then you're only feeding maybe a couple kilos of an 8% feed, we're
Yeah.
still well below what a performance horse would need. That will definitely meet maintenance requirements, right? If we're looking at like 600 grams of protein for a horse who's kind of sitting around not doing much of anything. But when they start working hard, they do require more. And sometimes you might be meeting their crude protein requirements with your hay, but you're not meeting their amino acid requirements. So they still can't really make use of that protein properly, and they still won't be able to build the muscle unless you can provide the good quality amino acids to make sure that that muscle. So that's where looking at a higher protein ration balancer or feed can come in, because those feeds are generally formulated with lots of lysine, methionine, threonine in the right ratios that the horse can make use of that.
For amino acids.
You can, but it's expensive, and most people don't. They just do for protein, right? And we are not sure how much lysine and methionine, threonine is in that hay. But you can normally tell, like looking at the horses, you can, okay, like I go into a barn with 20 horses and most of them have a crappy top line. It's probably because maybe the hay is 10% protein, but it's not good balanced amino acids, and the horses aren't really making use of that protein, and they are not able to use it.
What happens, is there a great difference as the horse ages?
Yes. So senior horses actually have about the same as a growing horse as far as protein requirements and most nutrients really. And that's because as they age, their digestive system doesn't work as well. So they can't make use of the nutrients you're giving them as well. So you have to give them more because they just aren't as efficient as they used to be, right? So yeah, senior horses end up needing a little bit more protein as well. Similar to either a growing horse or a high-end performance horse, even if they're not working.
So when you talk about good top line.
Mhm.
So sometimes you will see a horse that has like good back structure and stuff like that. But some of them will have a very good working wither,
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah.
But there's other ones that you can see that are very, very wide across the wither.
And some of that is their bone structure, right? Like some of them are a little wider.
Yeah.
But
some of it's not.
even a high withered thoroughbred can put good top line over their withers. It takes good nutrition and it takes good work. But you'll see on your sheet there, we do a top line evaluation score, which is about where we were in our presentation. I can go back there. That we talk about how full the top line is from their rump, and then their back, and then their withers. So when I'll get you there. So yeah. We already did all that. Okay. So when you're talking top line, a perfect score, like a 3 out of 3, means they are full over their rump, they're full over their back, they're full over their ribs. A 2 out of 3 or a B would be their back and their rump are full, but not their withers. And then a C would be their bum's full, but not the rest. And if they don't have any top line at all, we're probably talking like an emaciated underfit first horse, because normally they have at least a little bit over their rump. And when a horse loses top line, they lose it front to back. And when they gain top line, they gain it back to front. So they fill from their bum and then their back and then their withers. So sometimes you'll see horses that, like you said, have a nice back, they have a round bum, but they just won't fill in that withers. It might be that we're not quite meeting the protein that they need or the exercise that they need to build that muscle. But there is some breed variation, some genetic variation. Some horses will just never look, as round as a halter quarter horse or something, right? Like they're just not going to do that because they're not built that way. But we can still see sufficient muscling over there that it doesn't look hollow, right? If it looks hollow, we probably haven't met that horse's genetic potential for top lines. That makes sense, right? Okay, so I do want to cover a little bit quickly. The sheet in front of you has one side, the blue side is top line, the red side is body condition score. Does everybody know the difference between those two and what we're measuring? Yeah, let's go over it quickly. So body condition score is a measure of how much fat is on your horse. It has nothing to do with muscle. It has nothing to do with fitness. It is 100% how much fat is that horse carrying on its body. Top line is strictly a measure of the muscling over their back. So we talked about it, the withers, the back, and over the rump. When you're body condition scoring a horse, we're not going to do a whole, like I could do a whole lecture on just body condition scoring, but we're going to do it briefly here. The easiest way to see whether your horse is over or underweight, an ideal body condition score is a 5. And on a 5 horse, you should be able to very easily find ribs with your hands. You shouldn't have to go digging through layers of fat to find the ribs, but you shouldn't see the ribs. And the reason I say the rib cage, there's lots of other spots that horses hold fat in their body, over their shoulders, over their withers, over their bum. But the easiest way to learn how to to body condition score, is over the rib cage. And that's because horses don't put muscle on their rib cage. The only thing they will accumulate there is fat. So if your horse, if you can't find ribs, if you're digging and digging and you can't feel them, your horse is too fat, right? And it's a good way to be objective about it, because sometimes we get our feelings hurt a little bit when somebody's trying to say that your horse is overweight and they go, no, she's not. She's just how she's built. That's her breed. But at the end of the day, you can body condition score every breed. Yes, draft horses and quarter horses tend to be heavier. It doesn't mean that they're not fat, they're still fat. They really are. But you can objectively look at your horse and use your hands. Looking at a horse, you can't tell everything. There's a lot of hair there, especially this time of year, they're shedding out. You can't just look at him from afar and go, oh, he looks good. You need to feel him. Okay, so that's one thing. If you take nothing else home from this tonight, when you're trying to objectively figure out, is my horse too thin or too fat? Please use your hands over his rib cage and just be objective. Can I feel ribs? If I can't feel them at all, we're probably talking like 7+. If you have to dig just a little bit, but they're there, that's a 6, which is still a healthy body score. We like to see horses in 4 to 6. Sometimes a horse in heavy race training or something, you're never going to get up to a 5. You're always going to see faint ribs. That's okay. That's still healthy. A brood mare or something like that, we like to see them carry a little bit of weight when you're breeding them, because when they foal out, we know they're going to expend a lot of calories when they're nursing that foal, and we don't want them to start at a barely 5, because then she's going to lose condition. But if your horse does not fall within that 4 to 6 on the red side of your sheet, then we probably need to make some adjustments to their diet or exercise to get them in that 4 to 6. And as I said, top line condition scoring is really that muscle over their back, not anything to do with fat. Okay, so moving on, minerals. Minerals are important for so many reasons. They have a play in pretty much everything that goes on in the body of a horse, and they all interact with one another. So it gets a little scary when people are trying to make their own horse diets, and they're not using some sort of pre-formulated or balanced vitamin mineral, because having these vitamins and minerals in balance is so important. If you don't want to just make sure, okay, I've got calcium, I've got phosphorus, I've got this, I've got that. You need to make sure that they're in the right ratios with each other. Because sometimes having one mineral out of balance can throw off the absorption or the usage in the horse of a whole bunch of other ones, and you have all these other problems. So it is complicated how they all work together. And that's why at the end of the day, you know, we like to have PhD nutritionists who are formulating our diet that know how these things interact. But yeah, I mean, they play a role in bone development, muscle development, milk production, skin and hoof integrity, fertility, appetite, nervous system, fetal development, disease resistance. Like there's nothing in the horse's body that doesn't have some sort of interaction from minerals. Vitamins, we're going to briefly go through this. Same thing. Some vitamins work in conjunction with each other, and if you don't have enough of one, the other one doesn't work. Not quite as bad as the minerals as far as interactions go, but there are two types of vitamins. The first kind is fat soluble. So these vitamins stay in the body and they can be stored and used long term in the tissues. So these are vitamins A, D, E, and K. Water soluble vitamins, on the other hand, do not stay in the body. They are used, and whatever the horse doesn't use gets flushed out in the urine. So these types of vitamins need to be supplemented every day, because otherwise the horse is going to be lacking them in the in-between days that you're not supplementing, because the body is not going to hold on to any of those vitamins. This also means that fat soluble vitamins, you can overfeed those because the horse can store them in their body and you can reach toxic levels. But water soluble vitamins, that will pretty much never happen because the horse just pees them out if you don't use them, right? Healthy horses can synthesize some of their water soluble or B vitamins in their hindgut. They also can synthesize some vitamin K. But when a horse is under stress or performance needs, the hindgut doesn't work as well, for one, and it doesn't allow the horse to absorb those vitamins as well. So when you work your horse or stress your horse, you put your horse out of the field and put them in the cross size, what's the first thing they do? Poop, right? What's the first thing they do when you put them on a trailer? Right. So as soon as we stress the horse, we increase the rate of passage in the digestive system, and now maybe those microbes are making lots of B vitamins, but it's getting flushed out so fast that the horse can't use them. So when a horse is stressed, it's really important that we supplement these B vitamins because they are really important in controlling anxiety and focus in their brain. They're important for muscles. They're important, like there's a whole host of things that these B vitamins do. Biotin is a B vitamin. So biotin is really important in hoof integrity. If your horse is stressed and he's not getting enough biotin, the hooves are probably going to start getting brittle and cracking. And it doesn't mean that you're not feeding enough to meet his requirements as a pasture pup, but now that we have stressed him and started him exercising, he's not absorbing it anymore, so we need to supplement more. Everybody make sense to everybody? Okay. So here's the number one most important nutrient, not that water is really a nutrient, but most important part of a horse's diet is water. It doesn't matter what you feed your horse, how much money you spend on supplements. If your horse is dehydrated, they are not going to do well. Absolutely 100% of the time. Water is the number one thing. The first thing you should always be worried about in your horse is how much are they drinking. Horses can go for days or even weeks without adequate food and survive. Now they're not going to do well, but they'll survive. But if they're deprived of water, they can die very quickly, within a day or two sometimes. At the very least, you're going to suffer impact colic, dehydration, horses tie up, horses have all kinds of issues that occur when they're dehydrated. So a horse should be consuming 0.3 to 0.8 gallons per 100 pounds, of body weight per day for maintenance. So this is 8 to 10 gallons per day for the average adult horse that's sitting around doing absolutely nothing, right? So that's 2 full 5-gallon pails a day. If you exercise your horse, they probably need a lot more than that. If it's hot out, if they're sweating a lot, if they're lactating, if it's a broodmare, if you're feeding a high fiber feed, so everybody loves fat and fiber feeds, you increase that soluble fiber level, they need more water to break that down and use it. The more you exercise the horse, the more water they need. So I always say that 2 pails a day, that's just if they're doing nothing, right? If we stress them, add exercise, add heat, add sweating, all these other things, they should be drinking more than that. Okay, so we've gone through all the nutrients that we're adding to balance our hay. Now, how do we pick a feed? There's so many options out there. How do we know what's going to work for our horse? So if we're talking about a performance horse, I'm better, but my voice is not 100%. Most feeds are going to have what I call like a purpose statement or a mission statement written somewhere, probably on the feed tag or somewhere on the bag, that will tell you what it's for. So it should read something like it's for performance horses or equine athletes or for all classes of horses. If it said, excuse me, for mature or idle horses, or it says for maintenance horses, this is probably not going to be sufficient for a performance horse. It's not going to have enough calories. It's not going to have enough vitamin, mineral, and amino acids for them to do their best on it, right? So now you can check the crude fat and crude fiber on the tag to get an idea of what type of feed this is. So you've read the mission statement, but sometimes marketing will fluff up what this feed actually does, right? And so in that mission statement may not really help you that much because it says it's great for all kinds of horses. They're not all great for all kinds of horses. Yes, there's lots of different ways to feed the same horse very well, right? There's not one answer for every horse. There's probably 10 different ways you can feed that horse. But not every single feed works for every single horse. That's just not true. So first thing you want to do is check your fat, check your fiber. Your fat is a good estimate of how many calories that feed is bringing to the table. So for a lower calories feed, so we're going to look at low fat and higher fiber. This is going to have higher structural carbohydrates in it, so that ADF and NDF. So we're looking at fat levels that are less than 4, fiber levels that are greater than 16. These are best for horses that are in light training or easy feeders, not necessarily what I would use for a high-end performance horse. If we're looking at medium calorie feeds, so high fat and high fiber, we're looking at fat between 6 and 12%. Fiber is probably still greater than 16. This is good for horses that are in moderate to heavy training and doing longer duration exercise. So those types of horses that can derive most of their calories from fat, not necessarily horses who are doing the short sprints and kind of shorter duration, high intensity. For those horses, you want to go to type C. So these are the highest calorie feeds. They're typically high in fat and lower in fiber. You can't have a feed that's high enough in NSP or structural carbohydrates, so those starches and sugars, and high enough in calories if it's really high in fiber, because it's going to fill too much of the feed. There's just not enough room for the other stuff that the horse needs. So these types of feeds we would consider high fat, low fiber, higher in NSC, are going to have fat anywhere from 6 to 12%. The fibers can be lower though. You're going to see it in the 6 to 10% range. So these feeds are best for horses that are in heavy training of the type of sport that has that high intensity, shorter duration work. So race horses, jumpers, barrel racing horses, that kind of thing. Make sense to everybody?
Here's a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she says, why do the labels not?
So most feeds will list somewhere that they are low NSC, moderate NSC, higher NSC. They never say high because everybody thinks that it's bad, but they don't say low or moderate, then they're probably high. But they don't necessarily put the number, the NSC percentage on there for a few reasons. One of them is that not every feed company calculates it the same way. So if everybody put their numbers on the bags, some of them would be a little inflated, like they wouldn't be comparing apples to apples. The other reason is that they can fluctuate a little bit. So some products do have a stated NSC on the bag. We have some that we will say this product is a maximum of 10% NSC, or it's a maximum of whatever, 18% NSC. Those products have guaranteed starch sugar levels. Some products will have a percentage plus or minus a range. So it might be plus or minus 2% or 3%. So that's why they don't really want to put that on the bag, because it's not every time 22%. It might be 20%, it might be 24%. They do have to keep it within the range that they tell you it is. If it's not on your bag or on your feed tag, contact the manufacturer because they will give it to you, but they don't necessarily publish it. This is the same for ingredients. Some feed manufacturers don't put ingredients anywhere on the bag. They don't put them on the website. You can't find them. But if you contact your feed manufacturer, they have to give them. Or they should. They don't, you should have different feed. Purina does publish our ingredients. They're on our website for all of our products. We do not publish our NSC values, and for those reasons, except for some products. So we do have our integrity is a maximum of 10%. We publish that. It's all over the bag. It's on the website because it is a guaranteed starch and sugar level, because that product is designed for metabolic horses who cannot have high starch and sugar. We have a few other products that we do guarantee and publish, but not every single product. I'd say there's 5 or 6 of them that it's published. But the rest of them, if you want to know, email me or call me and I can get them to you.
Why would that be that?
Will fluctuate. So depending on how a feed is manufactured and how their ingredient list is put together, some companies have what they call fixed ingredients. So this means that their ingredients are the same every single time, they never change. And most people think they want that, a fixed formula. But at the end of the day, it's not really what you want, because one load of oats and another load of oats might have different starch and sugar levels, and they might have different protein levels depending on the growing conditions that those oats were grown in. So what our company does is we have what we call fixed nutrition. So we use the same ingredients, the ingredients don't change, but we will fluctuate the amount of the ingredients. So based on the nutritional analysis of those ingredients. So that at the end of the day, your feed meets the specs on the tag every time, right? We haven't changed what's in it, but we will fluctuate the amount. So when we do that, the NSC might fluctuate a little bit, right? In some products. So depending on what product it is, the products that have more grains in them that are more variable in the starch and sugar levels will have a higher range. They might be +2 or 4%, plus or minus. But those products that don't really have much grain in them, like integrity, right? It's a true fat and fiber feed. It's designed for metabolic horses. It doesn't really fluctuate because the ingredient profile may fluctuate to meet the other specs, but there's no significant starch and sugar in there anyway, so it's not going to change. Does that make sense? Do that? Right. Okay, so when we're choosing our performance feed, here's my spiel. Check the ingredients. Not every feed in the tag specs or guaranteed analysis is equal, because they can use all different kinds of fiber ingredients to get to that 20% fiber or whatever the tag says. And some of them are more digestible than others. Some of them are more nutritious than others. Some of them have really good health benefits for the hindgut. Some of them don't have any benefits for the hindgut, and the horse literally will just poop the fiber out because it's not soluble enough to be digested. So don't just look and say, oh, this is 20% fiber and this is 20% fiber, so it's the same thing, because it's not. Knowing what ingredients is in your feed is a huge part of knowing how good quality you're giving your horse, whether that's fiber ingredients, protein ingredients, fats, whatever, right? If you need help to figure out which ingredients are suitable for your horse, please reach out to somebody. Every feed company is going to have reps that want to help you. Don't be afraid to ask, because I know our company, there's 5 of us across Ontario. We're happy to come on farm for free. Our information and our consults are free. So why wouldn't you ask? If you're confused, if you have questions, just ask. Because that's what we're there for. Okay, so we figured out what feed to feed our horse. How do we know how much to feed him? So the first thing you're to do is look at the recommended feed rate on the feed tag. Most people never do that, right? who's actually read the feed tag on the board? You did? That's great. That's awesome. Half of you. That's amazing. Most people don't read it. And then you're going to feed your horse to your desired body condition. So the feed rate that's on the tag is not based on the calories that your horse needs. It's based on the vitamins and minerals that your horse needs. Because every horse has a different metabolism, different level of work. So that range of feed between, 1 and 2 kilos per 100 kilos of body weight, that's not based on how many calories your horse needs. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so we're going to feed our horse the amount of feed he needs to maintain good body condition. And then if we're feeding less than that tag told us to feed for our horse's size and activity level, we're going to use a ration balancer or a vitamin and mineral to bump the mineral and vitamin profile and amino acid profile up where it needs to be without adding additional calories. So from Purina's line, we have Equalizer and Optimal. Those are our ration balancers. The reason that they work so well for this is that they are very concentrated in vitamin and minerals, so they have a low feed rate, but they're low in calories. So we take our feed, our performance feed, we figure out, okay, the feed tag says I need to feed my horse 5 kilograms of feed, but he doesn't need that much. He's in good body condition with 2 kilograms. Now, how much of a ration balancer do I need to provide him to make sure he's still getting all the vitamin, mineral, protein that he needs without getting too fat? That makes sense? Okay. So we have a tool on our website that can help you do that. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on your computer. It's under equipurina.ca and ration balancer. So basically what you do is you enter the feed that you're using. Now this only works if you're feeding a Purina feed, but if you're not, contact us and we can help you figure out what approximately the fortification level is in your feed and kind of find an equivalent. You would choose your activity level, and then you have to choose the nutrient requirement level that you want. So for your options are the minimum NRC. So that's how much your horse needs to not have any deficiencies, right? That's the bare minimum you should be feeding him. And then there's this Purina superior level. So that's the level of nutrition we would prefer for any horses that are working. So performance horses, senior horses, growing and breeding horses, any horse that has any sort of health issue, we want to balance at that higher level of nutrition. And anybody who wants to just get the best performance they can out of their feed, then you should probably balance at that higher level. But basically, if you're anywhere in between the minimum and the Purina superior, then you're in a safe range for that horse. Yep.
Now, are you talking without hay? So
Yes.
basically, I'm just, I'm eating my horse's processed food versus with the supplements.
So the reason that we're not including hay in this, because it's a simple balance, right? We can do a more in-depth ration balance using hay analysis. We can do that. Not everybody can do that. It's a lot of work. But the reason that we don't worry about that when we're trying to determine this is because it's balancing for selenium. And selenium is pretty much deficient in Ontario horses. There's none in the soil, there's none in our grass, hardly any anyways, none in the hay. And that's the first thing we're going to see a deficiency in most horses in our area. So we are balancing this based on selenium requirements.
In general, though, like the processed foods, be it great, whatever you're eating.
Yep.
Like I was always taught, and the nutrition things that I've read always said that horses should, like they're continual eaters basically, so they should be munching on something.
Yes, absolutely.
They're just gut health in general.
Yeah.
So when you are feeding a process like a bag of feed, do you take into consideration the race and everything else of getting from
Yeah, so this is not saying you should exclude hay.
Oh, no, I'm not saying
Yeah, your
that,
horse
but
should
like,
be having
but
hay.
you're, like, if I'm trying to figure out, like, if I have a competitive horse.
Yep.
And I'm, they need so many calories.
Yep.
To burn, I know, type thing.
Yep.
Well, so I would work with the bag food first, and the hay is sort of like a a treat in effect, just to keep them busy so they don't get into trouble?
No, you would still want to be feeding at least, 1.5 to 2% of their body weight in hay, so 15, 20 pounds of hay. As a minimum, and that's to keep their gut healthy. They need that long stem fiber to keep their digestive system working properly and to curb boredom, prevent them from cribbing, prevent them from leaving, like all those stereotypic behaviors that come from a horse who doesn't have something to munch on. You absolutely still need to do that. But we know that that hay is probably not bringing significant selenium or other vitamin minerals sometimes. Sometimes it's, pretty good calphos and something like, but they're not, doesn't have much for vitamin E. It doesn't have selenium in it. Like we know that about cut dried hay. So this is balancing for those vitamins and minerals that you're probably not getting in significant amounts from your hay.
And one of the other things that I have read and, that kind of stuff is, a lot of the process, mostly in the grain category, not in the, like, let's say, pellet.
Yeah.
Many horses that are again under stress and competitive, ulcers.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna have a whole topic on
Jump
it.
into that.
Yeah, but you're right. For those types of horses, I wouldn't recommend high starch and sugar feeds, right? Because that's the detrimental part of the grain. When the grain is broken down in the horse, those starches turn to sugars. Those sugars are what's causing the problem for excitability, or horses who have metabolic problems, or horses who have ulcers. So for those types of horses, you would stick to something that's low in NSC. You would use a fat fiber type product, and then something like Equalizer Optimal is still perfectly safe because they are very, very low in starch and sugar. There's really no grain in them, right? They are vitamin, mineral, protein with a hay pellet carrier, right? That's what they are. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay.
I was just wondering
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, we only went halfway through our ration balancer and I stopped. I got distracted. Okay, so we've only done the first part. We've decided we're gonna balance our horse, say, for Purina superior level. I could be doing this as a demo for you right now. We couldn't. Excuse me. All right, so the next question, step 4, you put in your horse's body weight. So you need to put that in kilograms because it's set up in kilograms. Don't put it in pounds or you're gonna get double what you need actually. If you don't know how to convert it, you take the pounds and divide by 2.2. So an 1,100 pound horse is about a 500 kilo horse. So we're gonna say this horse is 500 kilos. It's gonna tell us we need to be feeding 3.35 kilos of feed per day. And I think this is on Super Fiber Plus. Again, that is not to meet that horse's calorie requirements. It is to meet his vitamin and mineral requirements. If that horse doesn't need that much feed, say he only needs 1 kilogram of feed, in step 5, we're going to say, okay, we only feed him 1 kilo. And it's going to spit out, well, then you tell it, I feed Equalizer or Optimal. The difference between those two products, main difference is the protein level. Optimal is high protein and Equalizer is lower protein. So Equalizer is designed for kind of maintenance horse, adult horses who maybe aren't in a whole lot of work. Maybe they have really good hay. If you're feeding like an alfalfa hay or even a blend alfalfa timothy or something that has fairly good protein in it, then you can get away with using Equalizer. Optimal would be recommended for any growing horses or breeding horses for sure. Most performance horses are going to do better on Optimal because it has more protein, good balance of amino acids to help them maintain their muscles and perform well. Senior horses also do better on Optimal for the most part. And that's because, again, their protein requirements and their vitamin mineral requirements are actually closer to a growing or performance horse than they are to an adult maintenance horse. Just because their system doesn't work as well as it used to. They don't absorb nutrients as well as they used to. So typically senior horses will do better on Optimal. But it kind of depends on your hay a lot too, right? So that's normally the first question. If you're feeding a grassy, low protein hay, then even maintenance adult horses can sometimes do better on Optimal because they're not getting that good quality level of protein to help maintain.
So optimal the same as Equalizer, little.
Yep, they're just a pellet. It's a little bit lighter in color because it has more soy in it and less alfalfa. But yeah, it does basically the same thing. The cal-phos ratio is a little bit different because it's designed for breeding horses, but it's still okay for a performance horse or a senior horse or I use it on my guys who are really not doing much of anything anymore because my hay is fairly low in protein. And I do notice a big difference in their top lines when they're just sitting around all winter eating their round bale. They still are maintaining, like I've got a 19-year-old quarter horse who has a beautiful top line, it's just doing it all anymore. I do see a difference when I'm keeping that acid profile up. Okay, so then it's going to tell us we need to feed, you can't see that, Lori. It tells you need to feed 392 grams of equalizer to meet that horse's vitamin and mineral requirements when they're getting 1 kilo of horse. So you can use this tool on your own horses at home when you make adjustments to a diet and you're not sure, okay, they're getting too fat, I'm going to cut back my feed. Now, how much optimal equalizer do I need to feed? It's really nice that way, and it's very easy to use. So I encourage you to check it out on our website if you haven't. It's a good tool to use. Okay, so moving on. We've talked about the diet. We figured out what we're going to feed our horse. We've balanced it for vitamins and minerals and proteins. What else do we need to worry about for a performance horse? So electrolytes are a big one for horses who sweat significantly. And the reason that it's such a big deal for horses is when humans sweat, we have sweat glands that reabsorb a lot of our electrolytes. When we sweat, it's mostly water. When a horse sweats, that is not the case. You ever seen a horse that's really, really hot? They have that white foam coming off them. That's essentially just salt. They're just pouring electrolytes out of their body and they don't reabsorb it very well. So horses lose a significant amount of mostly salt, sodium and chloride through their sweat. So salt should always be available free choice for every horse. And that's not just because they need it to replenish their electrolytes, it's because salt makes horses drink. And the more salt they have, the more water they have. And we already talked about how water is so important. If you have horses that don't drink well, if you add loose salt to their feed, I guarantee you. Salt blocks are not my favorite source of salt for horses. They can be available. It's not saying don't use them, but for horses who don't drink well or work hard and need electrolyte replacement, use loose white salt in their feed. And the reason for that is that salt blocks are designed for cattle that have a rough tongue, and they'll lick and lick and lick and get a bunch of it. Horses don't have a rough tongue, and their tongue will get sore very quickly if they try to consume enough salt to meet their requirements from just a block alone. You might get the odd horse that will like chew on a salt block and get chunks, but even those ones, like if you put those little salt blocks in your stalls, how long do they last? 6 months, 12 months. To get their salt requirements from that block, if they're working hard and they're sweating a lot, they should be going through one of those a week. And no horse is going to do that. They can't. Their tongue will get sore. So it's cheap, it's easy, it will help your horses not colic, it'll keep them hydrated. It is the cheapest, best solution to keeping your horses healthy. Buy a 25 kilo or whatever bag of loose white livestock salt. It'll be like $10. Oh, inflation, it's going up, maybe 12 now. And add a couple ounces to their feed. Do it slowly. Some horses don't love salt that much and they will go off their feed if you just dump it all in at once. But if you start a little bit at a time and work them up to it, you can most times get horses to eat about an ounce of salt in each meal, and they'll eat most of it. They might leave it in their feed tub, but that's okay. They'll eat it the next day, whatever. It's so cheap, it's so easy, and I guarantee you, your horse will drink more. If you have horses that are really, really poor drinkers and they do not like salt and you can't get them to eat it, I've had racehorse trainers that will like mix salt up in a syringe and dose their horse with it because it will make them eat it.
Can you eat too much? They really just won't eat it.
You can, but normally if you get that high, they won't eat it anymore. And again, the requirements really vary on how much they sweat. If you have like a maintenance horse who's kicking around the field not doing much, half an ounce or an ounce might be enough to get them to drink, and that's all they need a day. But those horses who are working really hard, they're losing a lot of salt in their sweat, they need more.
I've often seen people giving during competitions Gatorade or along that line.
Yep.
But is that like, it's actually very high in sugar?
It is, but
But
there is, we're gonna talk about that in a second, but there is some research that shows that if you're gonna feed electrolytes outside of salt, you do need a little bit of dextrose or sugar for them to absorb it. So a little sugar is okay. Is a Gatorade formulated for a horse? No, it's formulated for a person.
No, but not like
Yeah.
along that line,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that kind of.
So yes, I would say number one, make sure they're getting enough salt, because most of what they're losing in their sweat is salt. 95% of that is just salt. So replace the salt first. That's the cheapest way to go, and it makes them drink. That's the focus.
Why white salt rather than blue?
Blue salt is higher in cobalt, and the blue salt is the high cobalt is actually designed for cattle because they have a higher requirement. Well, it won't hurt your horse, but you don't need it, and it's more expensive. Also on that line, if you're going to use salt blocks and you buy the trace mineral ones, they are 99% salt. There is 1% trace minerals, all the minerals in there. And then they don't get anything because they're taking 17 months to eat the salt block. So please don't use a trace mineral salt block and think the horse is getting sufficient minerals, because they are absolutely not. That's my other rant on salt blocks. So what I do for my horses is loose white livestock salt that I put right in their feed. I do put salt blocks out too, though, because it makes me feel better that if they want more, they can go lick it, but they hardly use it because they're getting enough salt. Also, it makes my boarders feel better because they see the salt block out there, even though they know I'm giving their horse salt. It's more of a people thing than a horse thing. Okay, so I should be careful. They might watch this. Yeah.
If they don't touch the salt block, does that mean they don't need salt?
No, it might mean they have a sensitive tongue and they don't want to lick it because it hurts. Yep. Yeah, I have like out of mine, my older mare wouldn't hardly ever touch her salt block. She's also very sensitive about everything else. She has sensitive coat. She has it's like, I imagine she just doesn't like how it feels when she licks the salt block. I have another mare that would grab at it with her teeth, right? And because she really wanted that salt and she would go after it. The one who didn't lick the salt block also doesn't love if I put too much salt in her feed. I have to be careful how much I put in. The other mare, you can put 3 ounces in there and she'll lick it right up. She loves it. So there is individual variation on how much salt they will tolerate based on their taste. Absolutely. But like I said, that's, you just have to play with it, right? You may not need 2 or 3 ounces. If your horse is drinking really well, there is salt in your feed. Right? It's not like they're not getting salt anywhere else. It's just if you find that they're not drinking enough, or you know they're sweating a lot, they're not getting enough. So you need to offer some other choice. You can also put loose salt-free choice out for them instead of putting it in their feed, but you don't know how much they're getting. So for those horses that aren't drinking well, I would still say put it right in there.
I used to feed my horses like hay, you know, they have their stuff, you know, the pellets and stuff. But I used to do a very high percentage sodium water mix and then spray the hay.
Okay.
With one of the little pumpers.
Yeah.
Is it better to put it in their food than to do that?
You're doing the same thing, right? You're putting salt on their hay instead of in their grain. The only thing I would say is you don't know how much,
yeah.
right? And that might be all right. If they drink well and you're not having any problem with dehydration, they're getting enough, right? But it's very variable depending on how much they work, how much they sweat, how hot it is, and how much each horse needs to make sure they're staying hydrated. Yeah, let's do it.
So, I missed it earlier, but the first question was why is optimal recommended for pictures?
So optimal is very low in calories. It is higher in protein, but it's lower in calories, and protein will not make a horse gain weight. So I would say most miniatures and ponies probably don't need optimal. They could do equalizer unless they have very low protein hay, they're breeding, lactating, growing, or they're working hard. Like there's some people who have hunter ponies that are getting rid of protein. I don't think those things need more protein. But neither one of those products is going to make a horse gain. Now, if you have a very obese horse, very, very overweight, and we're, restricting hay or increasing exercise, we can't get them to lose weight, there are some other vitamin mineral options that are even lower in calories than equalizer optimal because they're in a much lower feed rate. So to feed your average, medium-sized pony optimal, you'd be giving him probably 500 grams a day. There are products out there that you can give 150 grams a day and still get all the vitamin minerals they need, but you're going to sacrifice protein. Because most of those products, they might say that they're 10% protein, but the feed rate is so low that on a grams per day basis, they're not getting significant protein from it. So ration balancers are still the best nutritional way to go for most situations because you're providing that protein, vitamin, and mineral. But if you have an extreme obese pony and we need to get weight off this thing, there are other ways to cut calories a little bit more. Generally, you're going to want to try to find, lower calorie hay, use hay nets, exercise more, feed them less, use grazing metals, whatever you can do. Before I would cut the nutrition from the ration balancer and go to not lower quality, it's still good nutrition, it's just missing that protein.
Then I think that you kind of covered it. She said, do you recommend red salt, white pie, and then follow that up with your research about it, red pie and salt, please access.
I have never seen any research that says that it would do that. To be honest with you, most of the other salts for horses don't really make sense, right? Like I said, the red trace mineral salt has such a little amount of mineral in it that I don't really see the value of using that salt. I would just use salt. Blue salt is higher in cobalt. Again, horses need more cobalt. They were getting what they need from their diet, most likely. There's no need to spend that extra money. The fancy like Himalayan salts and all those ones, honestly, it's marketing. It is not any better for your horse than some people just like it, right? They're whatever rock salt and like that's fine. If you like it, go for it. But you're not doing your horse any better favors as far as hydration and replacing that sodium and chloride by using the fancy expensive salt. White salt is the way to go, in my opinion, if you're trying to save some money and still, do the job. It'll do the job.
There's more.
Yeah.
Getting with performance, but how all on fatter we need with MS should require more protein for diet.
You can tell by top line in a mini too. It's harder because when they're that overweight and they tend to be like fluffy, it's hard to see it. But for the most part, if the mini is not working terribly hard and they're not a broodmare or a growing mini, they probably don't need as much protein. They do have kind of lower requirements. And because minis tend to eat a lot more hay than they actually need for their body weight, right? People tend to feed them like they're a big horse, and they still only need, that one only needs 1.5% of their body weight, and their body weight's a lot lower than a horse. So, we're talking half a flake morning and night, and nobody feeds their mini that little, right? They feed them with everybody else, and they just get a round bale and they just eat. So they probably are getting quite a bit of protein from their hay because they're eating way more than they need to be eating. So at the end of the story, that's a long-winded answer to say it's kind of hard to tell, honestly. You could test the hay. You can try to evaluate their top line and their hoof quality, their hair coat quality, their muscle tone, whatever, the same way you would a bigger horse. But it is a little bit harder to tell if they're that overweight. Where the muscle is and where the fat is. When they start getting fat building up on their withers, then it's pretty hard to tell what the muscle looks like on the withers because it's really fat. Okay. Okay, so we talked about salt for horses. When is salt not enough? Sometimes for a high level performance horse that's working extremely hard and sweating a lot, we're talking, high level eventers or an endurance horse or a race horse where 4 or 5 days a week, they're coming in a lathered, heavy sweat, right? Really working horses. They may need more of a performance electrolyte. And this can help in delay onset of fatigue, so they can work a little longer before they get tired, reduces muscle cramping, and it can improve recovery, so the horse's ability to work the next day. So if we're looking for an actual electrolyte supplement instead of just salt, said most horses, you can cover it pretty well with just salt. You don't necessarily need electrolyte, but there are some situations where you may need them. Including some dextrose or sugar, like we talked about, does improve absorption of the electrolytes in supplements. So when you look at the label and you see sugar, don't be like, oh, I don't need that. I don't want sugar. Sugar is actually required in that product. It needs to be there. Electrolytes all need to be broken down with water to be absorbed. So if you're feeding a powder or a paste, and your horse doesn't drink significant quantities of water after you feed that electrolyte, it is just lying in the gut and it's not being absorbed until it draws in enough water from the horse's body that it can absorb those electrolytes. So then all you've done is taken a dehydrated horse and made it more dehydrated. So my opinion on it is if you can get an electrolyte that goes in water, that's better, because you know that they're not taking the electrolyte unless they're also taking water. Now that depends. If your horse is a great drinker and you know he's going to down a bucket of water at every event you go to, and you then go for it with the pace. But just be aware, it's not going to do its job. It's actually going to make things worse if you're giving a horse an electrolyte and they are not drinking it. So when you look at equine sweat and what they're losing, like I said, most of it is sodium and chloride, but the sodium, potassium, and calcium and magnesium should about equal the chloride, phosphorus, sulfur. So when you look at those ingredients on your electrolyte, they should also equal each other, because we're trying to replace what's being lost in the sweat. So what's in your electrolyte product should mimic what's in equine sweat. So that does its job. Does that make sense? Right. And yeah, when you're looking at sodium and potassium, it should be about the same amount as the chloride. So if you add those two numbers together and compare it to chloride, we should be in this about the same range. It's not going to be exact, but fairly close. And if that doesn't happen when you look at the label, it's probably not a very well balanced electrolyte, and I would look for it. All right, does that cover that for everybody? Any questions on that? Okay, so we're gonna move on. You have another question over there? No, you're okay? Okay. All right, so we're gonna move on to ulcers. This is not just a performance horse topic, but many performance horses suffer from gastric ulcers. And because I've had a lot of questions about it lately, it just keeps coming up, it's all over the place. I thought, why not cover it while we're on the performance horse topic? So what is a gastric ulcer in a horse? And why do they get them so often? Why is this a problem? I have read studies that say that 90 to 100% of racehorses in training have ulcers or have had ulcers at some point. There's also a huge prevalence of ulcers in other performance horses, in leisure horses even, in brood mares and young stock when they're being weaned, in senior horses who are on pain medication. Like it is a widespread problem. It's very common. You know, the first thing that anybody says to you and you say, oh, my horse is off their feet or they're really girthy, but the person probably has ulcers, right? It's really common. And the reason for that is that there's a few reasons. So one, the horse's stomach is very acidic, and it needs to be, because that stomach acid is there to break down the feed stuff that's coming into the stomach. But the acid is produced all the time. So people only produce more stomach acid when we eat. So when we chew and we produce saliva, that triggers our body into producing stomach acid. Horses are producing it all the time, whether there's food there or not, whether they're chewing or not, it's always being produced. And a 500-kilo horse can produce 60 liters of gastric acid. It's an extremely huge amount. Their stomach doesn't even hold that much, right? Like that's a lot of stuff, a lot of acid. And the anatomy of the stomach is really, unfortunately, predisposing horses to developing ulcers. So I'm going to go into a little bit of why. So this top section of the stomach is not protected from the stomach acid. The bottom section, the glandular section, naturally produces mucus and bicarbonate and other things that protect the lining of the stomach from the acid that's in there. But the top section doesn't have any of that protection. And the only protection it gets is from saliva when the horse chews, because that's a natural buffer. There's bicarbonate in the saliva. So the more the horse chews, the more saliva it produces and the more protection you get on that stomach. The reason horses have developed that way is that they're designed to be eating all the time, right? Small bits of sparse grass as they're grazing across their, you know, open plains when they developed, when they were, when they were wild, right? And obviously we don't keep horses. So when a horse is not chewing all the time and they don't have food in front of them all the time, one, they're not producing the saliva that's going to protect their stomach anymore because they're not chewing. And two, the bottom part of their stomach, when there's hay or long stem fiber in there, it kind of creates this mat that keeps the stomach acid down in the bottom where it belongs. But when the stomach's empty, it doesn't have that protection. So we no longer have protection in the top from saliva. We no longer have a mat of food to keep the acid where it belongs. So what happens? The acid splashes up into this top area and you get ulcers up here. Most ulcers are going to be found in that top section of the stomach, probably 80%. There are situations where horses will develop them in the bottom or high gut ulcers or other places. They can happen anywhere in the digestion tract. But I would say most common spot is this upper 2/3 of the stomach.
That's a good question.
Yes, absolutely.
So you were talking about hay kind of lining the stomach, which I guess would be either hay or would be concentrate.
Yep.
How long does that hay stay in their stomach?
Only,
Because if you feed hay at like 9 o'clock as
Yeah.
your night check, then you feed concentrate in the morning at breakfast.
no, it's empty. Yeah. So if it goes more than 4 hours between when you had hay in their mouth, it is out of their stomach. So basically, you don't want to let them go. Any horse that's prone to ulcers, sorry, I should practice that.
Right.
More than 4 hours without purge. Feeding a flake of hay 20 to 30 minutes before you feed your grain or exercise your horse is enough to put a bit of a mat in there and protect that acid splash problem from happening. Yeah. So that's a really good way of kind of preventing the issue. If your horse doesn't have free choice forage, and they go overnight and they do go for longer periods of time without hay, and sometimes that has to happen, right? Management style, or maybe your horse gets too fat when they have free choice hay and there's only, you're trying to balance their weight as well. Feeding a flake of hay 20 to 30 minutes before you ride is great. I would say the only time you need to worry about that before concentrates is if you're feeding a higher starch diet. So if you're
Otherwise,
just feeding a ration balancer or a fat and fiber pellet that's, lower than 18 or 20% FC, I don't think that it really applies as well. As long as the volume of feed is still reasonable. If we're talking huge volumes of feed, then that's another problem. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about when saliva production is not adequate to buffer that gastric acid, because that's a natural buffer for the acid, and to coat the lining of the stomach. That's when we see gastric irritations and lesions or ulcers occurring in that top part of the stomach. So ulcers can happen anywhere in the GI tract, but as I said, most often they're in the stomach and in that upper portion of the stomach. So to officially diagnose a horse with ulcers, you do have to scope them. Most times that doesn't happen because your vet comes and you say, look, this is the symptoms my horse is having. He's doing this, this, and this. And the vet says, okay, well, ulcers are very common. So we're going to treat him for ulcers. And if the symptoms go away, we're going to assume he had ulcers. And that's because not every vet has a scope that they can bring. It's expensive. You have to train the horse. So it's not always possible to physically look to see if there's ulcers before you treat them. And that's very common, right? Most times, most of the vets in this area do not have a scope that they can take. And that's okay, right? Because ulcers are so common and we give a list of symptoms and your horse seems to fit the bill, if we treat them and they go away, then you probably had ulcers. But if you're going to officially diagnose the horse, use a scope. They would grade the ulcers from 0, which would be no ulceration. That's a healthy, intact stomach lining. As grade 1 would be 1 or more small ulcers. Grade 2 would be large ulcers, 1 or more. And a grade 3 would be extensive, often bleeding ulcers. If your horse is in the grade 3 category, they have very obvious signs at that point. It's not going to be a mild, maybe they have ulcers. We're going to be pretty sure that they probably do because they're going to be showing a lot of signs. Yeah.
So in regards to that you limit their age.
Yeah, that can be hard. You would look at the other risk factors. So I have a list here of kind of risks of ulcers. And if the only risk you have to that pony is that they go for longer periods of time without hay, I wouldn't be too concerned about it as long as you're not exercising them on an empty stomach. So I would make sure that they have hay before you exercise them. I would also look at using slow feed nets if you don't already to try to slow down how much they eat. You're still giving them the same amount of feed, they're still getting the same amount of calories, but it takes them longer to eat it. You can double up the nets if they're like really fat. And honestly, Look for a lower calorie hay so you can feed them a little more, right? You can actually cut with straw if you have to. I wouldn't do more than a quarter to a third of their overall hay, but you can cut it with good quality clean straw to give them something else to chew on that's low in calories, to keep their gut full and things moving along, but not add calories. Okay. So risk factors for developing ulcers. Stall confinement. Horses who are on 24-hour turnout are much less likely to develop ulcers. Doesn't matter if you think that your horse loves their stall and they want to come in out of the weather. If you put them in a stall, you're stressing them, even if you think they love it. So if you have an ulcer-prone horse and you have the option to have him live outside, that's the best thing for him. So intermittent feeding and periods of fasting. We talked about that 4-hour rule. If your horse is going more than 4 hours without forage, you are putting him at risk for developing ulcers. Not every horse is going to develop them, but you're increasing the risk if you go more than that 4 hours. Stress is a big one. So anything that stresses our horses increases gastrin production in the horse, which increases the acid, hydrochloric acid production. More acid means more risk of having ulcers develop. Now, unfortunately, horses are pretty easy to stress. So everything we do to them is a form of stress, unfortunately. When we ride them, even the horses who are broken used to it, it's stressful. When we put them in a horse trailer, it's stressful. When we take them to a horse show, when we separate them from their buddies in their field to groom them and give them some treats, that's stressful. Everything is stressful. So unfortunately, that's not normally a risk factor we can completely eliminate, but it is something to think about. So horses who are in very high stress situations, racehorses, highest prevalence of ulcers, right? So just something to be aware of in horses who are prone to ulcers. Transportation, that's because of the stress. High grain diets, high NSC diets are way more likely to cause problems for horses that are prone to ulcers. And that's because when the starches go into the stomach and into the hindgut, they break down into VFAs. The higher VFA production, which is volatile fatty acids, is linked to increased risk of ulceration. So for a horse who has ulcers, we want to keep those starches and sugars as low as possible. It's not like you need to keep them at 10% or less, like a metabolic horse, but I would want to keep them in the under 22, 25, be kind of safe. Don't want to be feeding them like large quantities of oats or sweets or any of those higher grain diets. Intense exercise is a big one. More exercise the horse does, more stress they're under. Exercise stress is another form of stress, the higher risk of developing ulcers. NSAID use is another big one. So non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like bute and banamine reduce the mucus that is produced in the stomach that protects the stomach wall from acid. So when they're on bute and banamine for a long period of time, they are at much higher risk of developing ulcers because they don't have that natural protection of the stomach lining. So as our horses age, we're starting to keep horses a lot longer. We have a lot of senior horses that are in their late 20s, early 30s, that comes with arthritis, right? So we're looking for ways to keep them comfortable, but we have to think about the side effects of some of those pain medications we use and maybe counteract that to try to prevent them from developing other problems like stomach ulcers. Management changes, again, stress, right? You change what time you feed your horse or what time you turn him out or where he goes with his friend, move the horse from one field to another, any of those things. Weaning, that's a big one. When you wean a mare and foal, that's a very stressful time. So a lot of these are just things that we do that stress our horse. Illness is another big one. If you have a horse that's been on stall rest, they've been injured or sick, sorry, if they've had surgery or if they've been on antibiotics or any other kind of medication, all of those things can stress the digestive system enough that you may end up with ulcers. So horses who have ulcers, what do we see in these horses as symptoms? Your horse might have one or two of these. They might have most of these, depending on the severity of the ulcers and the horse. Sometimes they display pain differently, right? Sometimes we see chronic recurrent colics, so horse that mildly colics over and over, and you can't really figure out why. They're hydrated, any changes, we don't know what's going on. Sometimes it's related to ulcers. They often have poor body condition, but not always. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're perfect body condition. But sometimes when they're more severe ulcers, a horse tends to lose their appetite. So then they won't eat. And so then we're feeding them all this great feed that should be putting weight on them, but they won't eat it. So then they're losing weight. Even if they are eating it, they may not be digesting it as well because their stomach is full of bleeding ulcers and they're not breaking things down as well as they should. So we often see poor body condition and poor hair coat in horses that have severe ulcers. Sometimes you see chronic diarrhea or other gastro issues. Again, the digestive tract is all one. And when the stomach is off, the hindgut's probably not doing great either. So we do see some issues with loose stool and diarrhea in those horses too. Typically, the first thing people say is that their horse is droopy or irritable or anxious in the cross ties or just generally grumpy. They're in pain, right? And that's just their only way they know how to express it. They can't tell us. We're going to see exercise intolerance, poor performance, poor appetite, as I said, and sometimes you'll see cribbing or other stereotypic behaviors. Again, that is just them trying to relay the pain that's going on, right? That's their reaction to the fact that their stomach's hurting. Okay, so what can we do to reduce the risk of developing ulcers in a horse that hasn't had ulcers or in a horse that has had them before? Because once they have an ulcer, it's very common for them to get them again. They'll get the vet out, put them on omeprazole, get them healed up, and then the next thing you know, they've got another one. Yeah.
I actually read that omeprazole can cause more ulcers. When you start omeprazole, you're going to.
It's not causing ulcers, but the way that it works is to reduce the acid production, right? So when they're on omeprazole, the stomach acid production goes down, so the ulcers have a chance to heal. And then you take them off omeprazole and their stomach just starts producing acid again. So then if you haven't changed any of those other risk factors in your horse's life and in their management, they're just gonna get them again, right? The omeprazole just heals the ulcer that's there. It's not gonna fix what caused the ulcer in the first place. It's just so for those types of horses, like you do need to normally use a drug to get them to heal. Like it doesn't matter what management changes you make and what supplements you add. A horse that has an ulcer probably needs to go on omeprazole to heal it properly. But once it's healed, you need to make changes to their management, to their feeding practices, maybe add an antacid supplement or a stomach buffer. Like there's a lot of things you can do to prevent them from coming back. But yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say omeprazole causes them to come back, but it doesn't cause them not to come back, right? It just heals what's there. And then if you don't change the problem, it's just going to happen again.
And is there, you're probably going to get to this, but is there something other than your low grain diets, like your low, your high fiber diets? Are there other things like yeast, or is that unrelated?
I will get to that in a little bit. Yeast doesn't necessarily help with ulcers. Yeast is a great product, great ingredient to use for increasing fiber digestion and helping the hindgut stay healthy, helping the hindgut microbes, but I wouldn't say that it would help with ulcers. I also see claims, I don't know if you guys are on those space questions, this one being recorded. You're in those face groups that people say, my horse has ulcers. What products have you used that help you? And somebody always says like oil, I'm not gonna say which one, but this oil heals ulcers. There's no nutrition no nutrition reason why an oil should heal an ulcer. There is nothing that makes sense about that to me. So just, yeah, if you're going to use a supplement or some sort of nutraceutical thing to help your horse heal from ulcers or prevent ulcers, just make sure there's solid science behind it because there's a lot of them out there that don't. Sorry, that's my rare. Really be careful what I say to being recorded. Anyway, so management practices to help prevent ulcers or to prevent recurrence of ulcers. We want to increase turnout time, 24 hours if possible. We want to allow them to graze or consume free choice forage whenever possible. We want to encourage continuous mastication, so that's chewing, to encourage the production of saliva that contains natural buffers that are going to protect those stomach lining from damage. We always want to avoid sudden changes in their routine or diet. This includes your hay. So everybody knows when you switch from one grain to another grain, you want to do it gradually, but nobody does it for their hay. You run out of one type of hay and you just flop to the other type of hay. Hay makes up 80 or 90 or 95% of that horse's diet. So if you're changing, especially from, you know, a first cut to a second cut or a grassy hay to an alfalfa hay, like a very different type, please try to do it gradually. 7 days is enough, you know, feed 50-50 of the hay for 3 or 4 days and cut it down until you get to know what. Sometimes that's not possible, you know, not everybody has control over what hay is being fed to their horse, but when you do have control over it, if you have a horse like an ulcer-prone horse that's sensitive to these types of things, try to do hay changes as gradually as you can. Like, anyway, that's a soapbox thing. I'll get off it now. Okay, so feed your forage 20 to 30 minutes before grains or concentrates. This is especially important for high MST grains, which ulcer-prone horses probably shouldn't be on anyway, but you know, there's situations where they have to be. Race horses are very ulcer-prone, but they also need high starch and sugar diets to do their job. So in those situations, ideally, those horses can get some hay before you give them their grain. Always avoid exercise on an empty stomach. If you can do nothing else on that list of risk factors, if you can't get rid of anything else, do not exercise your horse on an empty stomach. When the horse's stomach is empty and you start moving him around, the horse's stomach is compressing and that acid is splashing out of the bottom up into the top. And there's nothing to keep it from doing that if you don't put some fiber in there. Eat some hay in their stomach before you run. Ideally, the horse should always have hay in his stomach because he's on pre-choice forage if he's an ulcer-prone horse. But if he's not, and he's a fat ulcer-prone horse and you can't give him pre-choice forage, please give him a flake of hay half an hour before you run. Or 2. Okay, that's my other soapbox. All right, if you're gonna have a stressful event in your horse's life, you know you're taking him for training, you know you're going to a big show, you're moving barns, whatever. Try to take preventative action before the ulcer happens. You know he's gonna be under stress. Let's do everything we can to reduce those other risk factors on that page. Maybe try feeding him a good antacid supplement. Maybe, you know, there's other things we'll talk about, but you know it's coming, the stress is coming, you can't avoid the stress, so what else can we do to reduce risk of ulcer? If you don't have access to pasture or good quality free choice hay for whatever reason, try using a slow feeder. That way the horse is still chewing all the time, they're still producing saliva, but they're not taking as much hay, they're producing their actual consumption. High calcium and legume hay is actually a very effective stomach buffer. So alfalfa hay, which some horse people are terrified of, is a great thing to give your horse that's prone to ulcers. Don't switch him to 100% alfalfa. That's not always recommended because then it's higher in calories. He's going to eat less. He's going to end up with less chewing time and less saliva. But if you can add a couple flakes of alfalfa to that horse's diet, it can be really helpful in buffering those stomach acids. This also works with alfalfa cubes, alfalfa pellets, roughage chunks that have a significant amount of alfalfa, however you can get it into them. Most studies say as little as 4 pounds of alfalfa a day can actually make a significant difference on that horse's stomach acid. And you want to spread that out throughout the day if you can, right? So don't just feed him his 2 flakes of hay at dinner or his alfalfa. Try to give him some in the morning, some in lunchtime or late night or whatever. The more you can spread it out throughout the day, the better the buffering effect that the alfalfa will be. Hydration, again, we already talked about how important hydration is. For an ulcer-prone horse, it is very important. If your horse is dehydrated, his stomach acid is more concentrated. Your horse has lots of water in his system. It dilutes the gastric acid and makes it less likely that he's going to develop an ulcer. Also, your horse going periods of time without water is very stressful for them. And you can see horses develop ulcers from going 12 hours without water. Like you have your water trough freeze, whatever, they don't have any water for 12 to 14 hours. That's enough for some horses to develop an ulcer. So hydration is super important. And once your ulcers have healed, there are some really good buffer supplements that you can feed horses. Just do your research on them. If you have questions about which ones are good, feel free to ask me. But there are some really good ones out there that you can feed every day as a preventative for horses that are under stress or, you know, other risk factors on that list that we can't get rid of in their diet, we can counteract that by feeding them an antacid that can help buffer the stomach acid and reduce the risk of ulcers. And certainly for horses who have had ulcers, we would want something like this to help prevent recurrence. If you're feeding a lot of concentrate or grain to this horse that's prone to ulcers, the best way to do that is in small, frequent meals. Don't feed him one big meal or 2 big meals a day. If you can avoid it, try to split that up as much as you can throughout the day, especially if it's higher in starch and sugar. Again, ulcer-prone horses probably shouldn't be having diets high in starch and sugar, but there are some cases where they have to, and in that case, it's best to feed them in smaller frequencies. Low NSC feeds with highly digestible sources of fiber are really the best option for most horses that are prone to ulcers. All right, we're almost there. I lost you guys yet. Okay, so take-home messages about feeding your performance horses.
Well, we're
Yeah.
still on ulcers.
Yeah.
Sorry, so like if we know we're heading to the big show and we've got the horse that is more susceptible to
Yep.
stress than
Yep.
say the next one, like what do you suggest at that point in time? Like adding one of these, like the
Yeah, for a horse like that, you could do it 2 ways. You could have them on a buffer all the time and maybe bump up how much you're feeding before a stressful event. Or if you're trying to, you know, keep costs down, you don't want to have them on it all the time. Like I have people that would feed a buffer spring to fall and then take them off it in the winter when they're not really doing much. There are situations where, you know, if you're only showing your horse a couple times a year, then maybe you could feed it 3-4 days before the event, during the event, a couple days after, and that would be sufficient. It just depends on that horse's routine and how worried we are about ulcers. If it's a horse that's had an ulcer before, I'd probably just feed it all the time to be safe, right? Because, you know, there's good antacid buffering products out there that'll cost you $2 a day per horse. What does omeprazole cost? So I would be just on the side of better safe than dealing with a vet bill. That's just me.
So what's an example of this?
So Purina has one that's brand new. We just put it out a week ago called Digestive Balance. And it is basically a buffer. It is not healing ulcers. I will say that it does not heal ulcers, but it will help prevent them. And the way that it does that is to buffer stomach acid. It's similar to Purina Mill's Outlast in the States, the base for Outlast. And that's, again, I work for Purina, so I'm going to tell you the Purina one. There are some other good ones on the market. I will say that ours is probably one of the most economical ones on the market. It's also very palatable. And that is a big selling point because horses who have ulcers tend to not want to eat. So then you buy them these great supplements that are going to help with their ulcers, but then they won't eat them because they're not very tasty. And then you're wasting money because the horse won't eat it, it's no good. So for me, I would look for something that has kind of research proven functional ingredients in it that makes sense, right? When you look at ours, we have calcium carbonate, we have red seaweed. Those are both research proven ingredients that help to buffer stomach acid. And then look at palatability. Like, will my horse eat it? Because that's the big kicker for a lot of the market. A lot of supplements on the market that look good on the tag, but then they struggle with palatability in the horse. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and it can work. Yeah, me neither. I don't think very good. Yeah.
Baking soda?
Baking soda.
It's not bad.
No,
Now they eat it.
yeah.
I used it, and it's not awful tasting.
Yeah, I don't know how much research has been done on how much they need to have a good effect. I haven't read that. Most of the buffer supplements that are marketed for horses use calcium carbonate instead. It does various. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the same thing. That's an antacid, right? Yeah. Okay, so our take-home messages today. We need to know how much energy and nutrients our horse needs based on their size and activity level, because it does vary greatly. We need to know the nutrients in our forage, if possible. Testing our hay is one of the best things we can do as far as making sure that our horse's diet is balanced and appropriate for their workload and their age and activity. We want to choose the correct feed and balancer for that horse based on the type of work he does and his metabolism, his body weight. And then we want to feed that in the correct amount. So using feed tag recommendations, using a ration balancer if you're not feeding to those tag recommendations. We want to provide salt and or electrolytes in some situations to make sure our horse is hydrated and drinking, and we're replacing all those electrolytes he loses when he sweats, when he's working. And then we want to look at that list of ulcer risks and try to reduce as many as possible. Sometimes that's not an option for horses who are under stress, and that's just the nature of their lives. So maybe then we look at adding in an antacid or buffering supplement that might help to keep that stomach acid in a healthy, normal pH, to try to prevent ulcers from occurring in the first place. Okay, I am going to do a little Purina plug because I do work for Purina. So if you don't know, all of our feeds are made in Strathroy, Ontario at our medication-free plant. So the reason that that is a big selling feature for us and that we're very proud of that, if there's no medication anywhere in our plant, there's no way that our feeds can be contaminated with medication. That's important for horses who are showing or racing because there's very, very sensitive drug tests going on, and they will pick up contamination from a ruminant feed that was made in the same mill. It happens all the time. Also, even if our horses aren't competing, some of those drugs that are used in other livestock feeds are lethal to horses. So they can be very sick, they can die from contamination of medicated feeds. So it's really important to me and to most horse owners that that doesn't happen to our horses. So using feed that's made in a medication plant ensures that we don't have to worry about that. We use very high quality and highly digestible ingredients in all our horse feeds. We don't use fiber sources that are just there to bump up tag specs on the fiber level. We make sure that the fibers we choose are very digestible and can be used by the horse. We only use plant sourced fats. We have complete traceability on all our products. There's a little sticker on all our products that has the lot code and the date and the bag number. We can trace that back to when it was made, what ingredients were used, and we have a really good system of being able to track that to make sure that we can follow up on any issues with our issues. We did talk a little bit about our fixed nutrition versus a fixed formula and why we do that. We do have all our ingredient lists available online, so you can see what is in the feed and what we're using for ingredients. And we do test all the ingredients for mycotoxins, which is another thing not all companies do. When the feed ingredients come into our plant, they are tested for mycotoxin levels, and if they don't pass, then we reject them. And then what happens to them? They probably go to somebody else.
What are
Molds. Yeah. And we have a great team of people like me across the province that are here to help you and really do want to help you and your horses do the best that they can on our products. So if you ever have any questions, please reach out to us. We really do want to help you to figure out what your horse needs and help you with any questions you have about our products or other products. All right, that's it for my presentation. Does anybody have any questions that we have not covered?
So if you come to the farm.
Yeah.
Like, would you look at all 18 horses, or would you look at the feeds for feeding, like what?
It depends on what you're looking for. Sometimes people want individual analysis on every horse, and we can do that. It takes some time, but we can do it. Sometimes they might have 2 or 3 horses they're concerned about, so we might look at them and then just take a look at your amount you're feeding and what you're feeding. I normally spend more time in the feed room sometimes than I do with the horses, because we need to figure out if you're feeding appropriate ratios, if you know how much weighs. That's a big one, because they should be feeding by weight, and a lot of people just feed by a scoop of this and a scoop of that, so they have no idea how much they're feeding. But it greatly depends on what you're looking for in a farm concept.
We have one pony that will eat the equalizer.
Okay.
Is the optimal more?
It tends to be less palatable generally than equalizer, unfortunately, but not for every horse. Every horse has their own taste, so you could try it. I know that some horses who are really picky and don't like optimal tend to eat equalizer, but it depends, right? The reason that I would say it's a little less palatable, it's higher in protein. That protein comes from soy, and horses don't tend to like the taste of soy as much as alfalfa, and equalizer is higher in alfalfa. But if it If your pony doesn't like equalizer, there are other options. We have a few other vitamin minerals that you could top dress on something tastier, right? We have a powdered one called Equi-Ease. We have a pelleted one called Easy Balance. Both of those are lower feed rates, and you could top dress it on just like a cup of senior or whatever's tasty to them.
Whatever you add to Trimax.
Most
That's the
horses
thing
like
you can
Trimax,
choose.
yeah, most horses like Trimax. Most ponies don't need Trimax.
I know. But that's all Spanish.
That's the problem.
She gets handfuls and we can bury her.
Yeah.
Yes, I have thoroughbred, 32 this year. He was very kind, actually, he was melted on the video. Wow. Massage. Then he got injured in there, but he doesn't have back molars
Okay.
anymore. So I do feed him pellets, and they, with a little bit, moisten them and put oil, he gets oil for dinner.
Yep.
I had cake cubes, so cake.
Yeah.
So is it better for me to, like, he gets 5 pounds for breakfast, 5 pounds for dinner. In the summertime, he eat chew with his front teeth.
Yeah, so he probably
Fresh
does,
grass.
he does okay on grass.
Yeah. I do put out hay. Is it better for me to break up those two meals?
How quickly does he eat the 5 pounds? In a while, or is he?
Well, he wanders around, like he eats it and he wanders around.
Yeah.
And he eats it.
Yeah.
All the animals on the farm are free range, so
Yep.
they come and they go,
Yep.
the welfare separate.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
That type of thing, would it be better? Because, after listening to the ulcers,
Yeah, it depends. I find a lot of those old guys take a long time to eat 5 pounds of hay cubes. Like you might only feed him twice a day, but if he's taking 4 hours to finish it or whatever, you could feed him a lunch, but from the sounds of things, his life is fairly low stress. There's probably not a lot of other risk factors. So you might be okay, not worrying about it too much. And he may not be eating much hay, but he's still chewing. So he's producing saliva. And the saliva is still protecting his stomach. So even though he's not digesting the hay anymore, having that hay available for him to chew on is still doing the same job.
because he gets 5 pounds a day in pellets.
Yep.
Morning and night too.
Yep.
So those takes him about 45 minutes. to eat
Yeah,
that.
he would. And 5 pounds is about the max that I would eat
Yeah.
in one sitting. The hay cubes don't count because that's hay, it's not concentrate. But if you get any higher than 5 pounds on his pellets, then absolutely he needs a third meal. But as far as the hay cubes go, he's probably okay if he's still munching on some hay and it takes a long time to eat those. Yep.
We need, of course, off the day.
Okay,
He is retired.
okay.
So how do you suggest we? I keep him on some grain.
Yep. Yep.
Lose his weight.
So I would look at what type of grain he's on. If
It's
he's
on off, I have it, it's on optimal weight. You
both,
suggest it.
both of them? Optimal and equalizer? Probably be optimal or equalizer. Well, you don't need both. You could do one or
Well,
the
it's
other.
on, yeah, it was on both.
So I would pick one or the other. For a senior horse, I would probably pick optimal.
Not 8 years old.
Oh, he's 8. He's just, okay. Okay,
He gets off. He's just
Gotcha.
stressed out.
okay. Yeah, not working
No,
right.
it's not
Okay.
working.
So if he's 8 and he's on fairly decent hay and it's not working, you could probably go to equalizer rather than optimal. I wouldn't wean him off equalizer. He still needs it. You can just reduce the amount he's getting. So how big is he?
Yeah,
Okay,
with
yeah,
that.
okay. So
Quarter
1,000
horse,
pound,
small
yeah,
quarter horse.
okay. So quarter horse who's doing no work and he's otherwise
For now.
healthy. I would say 3 cups of equalizer a day, and I would leave him on that. Because he's not working as hard, so he's not gonna be at a performance level anymore,
Yeah.
but he's still not getting vitamin E or selenium or a lot of other vitamins and minerals from his hay, so he still needs that, just to maintain his body function. Anybody else? comments?
Very informative.
You're welcome.
I love that.
If you have any suggestions on future topics you'd like to hear, please put them on your form for Emily, because I will do a presentation on just about any nutrition topic. I just need to know what you guys want to know.
Can you just tell me what the like preventative, you said Purina came out with?
Digestive balance. There are some pamphlets on the back table. The supplement one, the blue one on the left, has information on there on it. It's relatively new, so depending on where you're buying your feed from, you may have to ask them to bring it in, but it's available. Yeah.
Should basically all horses. Like minis, whatever. Be fed some sort of pellet.
They should be fed some sort of vitamin mineral. Doesn't have to be a pellet. It might be a mineral. It might be, yeah. It doesn't have to be a feed, and they may not necessarily need a ration balancer if they don't need additional protein, but they should be fed some sort of vitamin mineral. You can do that in a free choice situation if horses live outside. There are a few good, like powdered minerals you can use. You just have to be conscious of how much they're taking in. It's not quite as good as feeding them individually and knowing they're getting exactly what they need. But we have a powder one called Equi-Ease that you can put in a bucket, mix it with salt, 6 parts mineral to 1 part salt. The reason we do that is to slow them down so they don't eat too much of the mineral. The salt that kind of regulates intake. But you can put a bucket of that as long as it's somewhere dry in a running shed or something. And horses who are just out on pasture and not being fed, at least that way they do have a good source of vitamins and minerals. And they will normally intake about the right amount if you do that 6-to-1 ratio.
I have minis.
Okay.
And then EMS, of course, they're in a separate area than
Yeah.
thoroughbreds.
Yeah.
And the only thing I do is I do give them. Like when I soak the hay, I just sort of go like this, and I give them, about a handful in a dish so I can.
Yeah.
Give it to them so I can check them over in the morning at night time to make sure that they don't get.
Yeah, for horses like that, I would look into maybe something like Easy Balance or items, depending on whether you want a pellet or a powder. They're very low feed rate for a mini. You would only probably 50 grams a day, like 1 little scoop, just enough to make sure that they're getting vitamin minerals that they need. It wouldn't add protein. It's not going to add significant calories or fat or anything else. But just because we know that this hay is so deficient in vitamin, you want to make sure they have some source.
Because the only reason I even give them,
Yeah.
is just because they won't stand still for you to look at them, and this way at least their heads are down and you. They're not in.
Yeah, you could continue doing that and just add a little scoop of mineral on top. Yeah, there's a pamphlet at the back, the supplement pamphlet that has a few different mineral vitamin options in there that are low calorie, low feed rate, very economical. And it will make them eat. Yeah, I would do that for those guys instead of equalizer. Like you can feed like 200 grams, not quite a cup of equalizer for a mini, and that covers their nutritional needs as well. But there's cheaper ways to do it with even less calories that will still cover the
Because they just get slow feed.
Yeah.
They want to control their weights, so they. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Well, you guys, want to say thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
We're just after 9 o'clock.
Oh, look at that. I thought for sure I was gonna go over.
If anybody does want to hang around and fill it out.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And fill in your evaluation.
That was great. Thanks.
We're going to sign off. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Take care.